Yes, thank you so much. I see recording has started. Welcome, everybody, to session 2 of 3 webcasts that Partners in Learning is sponsoring around the topic of building educator capacity, specifically building educator capacity through teacher trainers and peer coaches such as yourself. So I want to thank you so much for your commitment. And as Maria pointed out, we have an amazing array of visitors from around the world. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce Maria Langworthy to you today. If you don't know Maria, we've worked together for a couple of years now. She is the first social scientist that I've ever met. She is incredibly dedicated and passionate to using her expertise in the research area and in the teaching and learning area specifically to really impact systemic change at a large level, and has done some amazing work and research, some of which has been the foundation of the professional development opportunity that Maria is going to walk us through today. So welcome, Maria, and we really appreciate you taking the time to joining us. I want to just kind of set the context again. We go back to this pyramid slide, which aligns to the UNESCO ICT competency framework for teachers. And what we're going to be talking about today is that 21st century lesson design or learning design, which falls at that level 300, and really on the UNESCO ICT competency framework is in that knowledge deepening and knowledge creation area of competencies. The level 300 resources are also found in our training provider portal, which is on pilltrainer.com. So I know that many of you have been exploring those resources this past week, which is great because that was part of your homework, and we've seen some amazing comments about you're already beginning to utilize the resources there, not just with educators that you work with, but are actually being inspired to try some different things in the classroom with your own students, for those of you who are educators and peer coaches. So I think that that is wonderful. And Maria, part of what Maria will do is walk you through the content of level 300, and we'll do some practice there. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to her. And she is going to talk to us about the learning objectives for today. Maria?
Thanks so much, Tracy, and thanks for everyone on the line for joining us today for this discussion. As Tracy said, we're going to have some fun. I'm going to talk a little bit about the research foundation behind 21 CLD, but then the main portion of our discussion will be focused on taking you through what this professional development looks and feels like. And it's quite a new type of professional development, not at all instructor-led, very much based in teachers collaborating with each other. And thankfully, we've got some volunteers that are going to, some are teachers and some are teacher trainers, to come and discuss with us and participate in the collaborative process that is 21st century learning design, and helping us analyze some of the learning activities. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about how you can start to use 21st century learning design and become more deeply involved, potentially, in the training and research community involved in. So let me kick this off. I have a couple of folks on the line with me that are going to chime in to this discussion, who've participated in this, either doing the training or analyzing the rubrics. And Jenny from South Africa, Jenny from Australia, who's just got off a 24-hour flight and is joining us. Silvana. And Silvana, where are you from? She may not be quite have her mic unmuted yet. We've also got Delana from right here in Washington State, who will be joining us. And
I'm from Argentina, Maria.
Sorry, you're from where?
Argentina.
Argentina, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Silvana. So have you done 21st Century Learning Design before?
I've been part of the first Pattern and Learning Institute.
Fantastic, fantastic. Great. So I'll start off, and the folks that are on the line, if you want to chime in or share your thoughts, please feel free to do so. And if I miss a question that pops up, please let me know, and I'm happy to interrupt my discussion to answer questions at any time. So the foundation of 21st Century Learning Design is the notion that we have a problem facing education globally. Many, many youth are unemployed, and at the same time, employers are saying that the people coming out of the schooling systems don't have the skills they need for jobs today. And a deeper problem, all around the world, we're seeing cases of student disengagement, of really a disconnect between what's taking place in schools and classrooms and what students are thinking is important for their futures and for their lives today. We see this as part of the challenge as we all face the transition from 20th century economic and social models to 21st century economic models. We've shifted from the locus of productivity being in the manufacturing and industrial to knowledge productivity and the growth of knowledge-based goods, drivers of the economy. And one of the speakers is someone is making some background noise, so if we could all be still a little bit, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So with the roles of educators and the roles of students are changing with this shift from, a focus on content delivery and basic skills in the 20th century to in the 21st century, teachers needing to support students more in the development and creation of knowledge-based products. Knowledge-based products are things that are built around intellectual property or IP, things like software, things like advertising designs, things like policies or programs. All of those are not material goods. They're not a television set. They're not a car. They're ideas-based products. And enabling our students and our youth to experience the production of those kind of goods is one of the big challenges facing education today. So with that context, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts in the shared notes section about what innovative teaching might mean. A lot of people start by thinking about innovative teaching with the technology component, but please go ahead and share your thoughts in the shared notes section and write them down and share them with others on the phone about what innovative teaching means in that context. So some great thoughts coming out here. It's creativity, teaching students through real-world scenarios, exactly, extending learning beyond the classroom. I can see some of you have looked at the ITL research before, flipped classrooms, some great ideas here. And all of these things have been brought into the ITL research project around innovative teaching and learning. It's been a global program that really looks at how schools and systems can best support innovative teaching practice. And it is the foundation of the 21st century learning design as professional development. ITL research is really looking across education systems as ecosystems at all layers, from the student level through the teaching and classroom level to the school level and then the system and policy level. It started in about 2009. In 4 countries originally, and then it expanded to 8 countries. And in the last year of the project in 2012, we started transitioning from pure research into practice. And that's the foundation of 21st century learning design. So ITL research really asks questions about how teaching can better prepare students for a knowledge-based world. It's sponsored globally by Microsoft Partners in Learning, and in local countries joined in. There were local, mostly ministries of education who sponsored the research in their countries. But the core questions are really about how innovative teaching can develop 21st century skills and how school and system level factors can best support teachers in adopting more innovative teaching practices. So that brings up the question of how we've defined innovative teaching practices in this project. And what we did was really look at a lot of existing research on what kind of things have an impact on learning. And what we saw was that it's a combination of pedagogical elements and technology use. It's not just technology use, it's how technology is used and whether it's embedded in a pedagogical model that can really support higher order skill development. And student-centered pedagogies really is about designing learning in a way that supports students in developing these kinds of collaboration, knowledge construction, self-regulation skills, and learning to learn. Extending learning is really asking students to solve problems in ways that are similar to the kind of work that they would face outside of school. And when we looked at technology use in learning in ITL, we really looked at how teachers were using technology, how students are using technology, and whether that use is layering technology use on top of traditional teaching, or whether students are being asked to use technology in higher level ways that help them develop collaboration, creativity, and those kinds of higher order skills. So ITL research, we developed with SRI International a number of different research methods and collected an amazing amount of data across the 8 participating countries. These methods are now being used by schools in over 45 countries to study and reflect upon their own innovative teaching practices. So the surveys are available through the Partners in Learning Network, and the rubrics have become part of this 21st Century Learning Design program, as you'll see. So what did we learn in this broad international ITL research project? The most important thing we learned was that when learning activities are designed in a way that call on students or require students to use 21st century skills, student work can and does demonstrate those skills. So what this graphic shows is the scores on of individual lesson plans that teachers submitted and how they were coded according to the ITL rubrics on 21st century skills. And then we also collected student work, and that was coded on these skills. And what you see is a very strong positive correlation between the way the learning activity is designed and the student work that's produced. So students are quite capable of developing these skills and demonstrating them when their learning activities call upon them to do so. But what this slide shows, this is data on the average scores of the learning activities that were coded across all the countries, where 1 means there was no opportunity in the learning activity at all for students to develop these skills, and 4 meaning there were very deep, rich opportunities. So the average score, the highest being 2, means across the overwhelming majority of learning activities we collected and coded for the project, teachers were not designing projects that would help students build these skills. And when we talked to teachers about these issues, it was very clear that many teachers understand the need to develop these skills. They just don't understand clearly how to do it, how to put these ideas into practice in their geometry class or language class or history class tomorrow. So let's look at some of the reasons why broader skills and innovative teaching as a whole is not being as well represented as it might be. So one of the questions we asked teachers was how they asked students to use technology. So this is one of the components of innovative teaching, as you'll recall. And what we see here is that teachers asked students to use technology in very basic level ways, in ways that layered technology on top of traditional teaching practices. Very few teachers are asking students to use technology in ways that really develop these higher order 21st century skills, their collaboration, their communications, their knowledge construction skills. Similarly, when we actually sent researchers into classrooms and had them observe what was taking place, we saw fragmented practices. We saw some teachers who were integrating technology, other teachers who would use elements of student-centered pedagogies, and a few who were doing problem solving and extending learning beyond the classroom. We rarely saw examples where all three of these elements were integrated in a way that really transforms the learning process. And when teachers talked about innovative teaching, they would use the word innovation, they would use the word technology, sometimes they would talk about 21st century skills, but they almost never talked about the underlying pedagogical patterns or theories that they were trying to use. They weren't thinking about changes in the underlying pedagogy that guided their teaching practices. When we did look at the school level for what kinds of factors in schools support innovative teaching more deeply, there were some clear and somewhat surprising results. So I again ask you to think about in your school, if you had to say what are the things that really you think support innovative teaching, what would be your ideas? Staff training, many people might say professional development, maybe leadership and culture. So some of the ideas here are excellent. What we saw in the, staff motivation, exactly. What we saw in ITL was actually somewhat surprising. The level of collaboration among teachers in a school was the strongest indicator of the overall level of innovative teaching within that school. So when there's a low frequency of teacher collaboration, you see lower levels of innovative teaching. When there's higher levels of teacher collaboration, there's higher levels of innovative teaching in a school. So while, leadership training, professional development, all of those things matter a lot, the actual level of day-to-day collaboration, teachers talking with each other about their teaching practices, sharing with each other. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Because if you as an individual are out there on your own taking a new risk to try something innovative, it's much more scary than if you're collaborating with other teachers, with other colleagues to try new things together. And it rather makes sense. Collaboration among teachers really builds social capital and is an incredibly powerful force in advancing teaching practices. Yep, when there's only one individual teacher that's innovative in a school, and the culture of the school isn't supporting collaboration or recognizing that innovation, then it's very easy for that teacher to become an outcast, as you're seeing in some of the comments here. Great comment there. We also looked in ITL research about the type of professional development that builds innovative teaching practices. So what at the system level are the factors that can really support innovative teaching? Some ideas here, again, long-term professional development with a focused and relevant plan, all excellent ideas. What we saw in the research was really the particular types of professional development really help support innovative teaching. When teachers are asked to directly practice new teaching methods, to really not just hear about it, but go do it in their classroom. And when teachers are individually or collaboratively researching their teaching together, looking at the impact their teaching practices are having on learning. And these are the kinds of professional development, really collaborative, really thinking about teaching as a research and reflective enterprise, that are the types of professional development that are really dominant in countries like Singapore and Finland that do really well on international tests like PISA. These are powerful forms of professional development that really put teachers in the driver's seats for their own professional development. We also saw that at the system level, there tends to be more barriers to innovative teaching than supports. In particular, we heard over and over and over again across all the countries except one that the way teachers are recognized doesn't reward innovative teaching in most cases. We also heard very strongly by school leaders and by teachers that success is really judged by traditional performance assessments. So any kind of innovation can be that goes unrecognized can actually take the focus away from higher scores on traditional types of assessments. The only country where that was not discussed was where they don't have a strong national testing and examination system. That country is Finland, one of the top scoring countries in PISA, where they don't have a big focus on these kinds of traditional examinations. So in summary, the ITL research kind of puts together a big picture on what it takes to really drive innovative teaching that can impact students for their futures. But it's not one thing. It's not one silver bullet. It's factors that operate across all levels of educational ecosystems, from continuing to drive student access to technology to and having them use that technology in ways that really enhance knowledge construction, to providing teachers with particular types of professional development that enable them to collaborate with each other to really design and research more innovative teaching practices. And at the school level, really creating systems, and at the system level, creating systems that can recognize and support and align with more innovative teaching and 21st century skills. So let me pause there and see if anyone that's on the line would like to add anything about this research picture.
I'll just wait and see if anybody else would chip in. Just to say that it has been a magnificent example of a learning journey of where countries, when they co-collaborate on aspects of student learning and professional development for teachers and school leaders, the sorts of outcomes that can come out of that at an international level. So if we can actually start to replicate that within our countries and within our classrooms as successfully as it's happening between the countries, then we would actually start to be looking at the successful outcomes that we're striving for.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. That's a great point about the need for countries to use these approaches within countries. And there's a question here as well about ubiquitous student ICT access. And other people are already chiming in. It really is about every student having access to a device that's connected to the Internet so that the rich opportunities, rich learning materials and resources, digital OER, as well as simply the tools to do knowledge-based work, to create things like PowerPoints, things like videos, things like doing analysis and deeper level work can take place, and synthesis and integration of information and ideas becomes possible for them. It's amazing what happens. One of the things that's really been powerful about this project is that through our partnership with Microsoft and their global sponsorship, when they heard this story and they heard that the teachers in the schools that participated in the research continuously came back to us and said, participating in this research project has been one of the strongest professional development experiences I've ever had in my life. Participating in the research gave them a clearer picture of how to do 21st century skills in their everyday teaching. And that was what, when Microsoft Partners in Learning leaders heard that, they said, we need to make research available to more teachers and more schools around the world. And that was the starting place for 21st century learning design. It's about using these research tools to redesign and rethink and provide a structure and architecture for teachers as they start to transform their practices. And as we build out this as professional development, we learn from exactly our own research that the focus has got to be on the design of the learning activity. If teachers can design learning activities, embed these types of skills, can develop these skills. And also that the most powerful types of professional development are where teachers are applying new ideas to their own practice and collaborating with each other to look at the impact of changes in their practices. So all of these things went into 21st century learning design as a professional development program. It's based on educator collaboration, the practice and analysis of the new ideas, focusing on learning activity design and the impact it has on students' 21st century skills. So 21st century learning design, the goal is to really bridge the gap between the theory of 21st century skills and enabling that to be put into practice, using the rubrics for coding and analyzing learning activities as the basis for redesigning learning activities or lessons, and also looking at student work that gets produced from these learning activities in terms of the impact of this redesign. So what we see are what we've developed through ITL was a number of different rubrics, and we've developed them and redeveloped them each year so that some of the numbers will have changed if you've seen them before, and we now have 6 rubrics for learning activities, and we also have a corresponding set of 6 rubrics for student work. But it gives you an example. And the best learning activities do well get higher code, so to speak, across a number of different rubrics. And what we're going to do is take you through some of these rubrics and have you code example learning activities as the main part of the session today so that you directly experience how this works and can get a sense for how this is put into practice. When 21st century learning design takes place, it tends to look like this. There's no one teacher standing or one trainer standing at the front of the class. It's about teachers really working together, collaborating, talking about how to improve learning activities or lessons. It's really exciting to be a part and to have a chance to talk with all of you today. This program has really taken off organically. Microsoft sponsored it in a few countries. It's now being adopted by programs in over 16 countries, and with your help today, we hope to expand it to many, many more countries. It's really becoming a global collaborative community of teachers, of teacher trainers and professionals really thinking hard about how we can redesign learning experiences. And so it's super exciting to be a part of this with you today. One of the reasons that teachers seem to love this so much is that it enables them to really change their teaching fairly quickly in very concrete ways. And this is a case from one school in Russia where our ITL research partner went in and collected a set of learning activities the first year and coded them. That's in the pilot year, the darker numbers, coded them by the rubrics. And then they went back and in that school conducted a 21st century learning design training session with the teachers. And the second year they went back and collected another set of learning activities. And look at the change between the pilot year and the second year in the degree to which the learning activities in that school embedded deeper opportunities for students to develop these types of skills. That kind of change in teaching practice is pretty rare based on professional development around the world. So we're very excited to to see how this can work, how it can change teaching practices, and the impact it can have on students. And speaking to the impact it can have on students, we have an example here of a school in South Africa, St. Cyprian's, a great school, where they've really started to embed this program very deeply for a couple of years now. And this is one of the comments from a student there. I feel as if we've come from a long culture of spoon feeding at this school. But I've noticed during the past year that teaching practices are really starting to change. A few teachers still spoon feed, but the others are really making us think and are challenging us with different types of projects than in the past. I really don't want spoon feeding because it will come back to haunt me at university, as it did with my sister. I want to learn about research, about debating, about teamwork, and all the skills I'll need in a job one day. So students that can articulate that, it's a powerful lever for teachers to recognize how this can work and see its impact on students. So let's get started on trying this out and seeing how it works. And we're going to go through this somewhat quickly, and give you the flavor of it, and we hope to have some in-depth training workshops in the coming year where we can take you through a deep training on how 21st century learning design can be facilitated. So the goal here is to develop a shared understanding of 21st century skills and how learning activities can design those in, using the rubrics as a collaborative framework, as I've discussed. So let's start with the collaboration rubric. And as I'm talking and describing this at a high level, I'd welcome you to go, if you haven't already downloaded and had a chance to look at the handouts in the upper right-hand corner where there's the three pages sort of syncing together. Go ahead and open that up. You can also find these documents on the pilltrainer.com site. But what we're going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the collaboration rubric looks like, and then we'll code some example learning activities on these rubrics. First, we'll start out with the learning activity examples called the House on Mango Street, and then we'll look at the Olympic site selection learning activity in terms of how they would be coded on site. So basically, I think probably most of you on this call understand why collaboration is needed. It's needed for project work and how work actually takes place all around the world. The kind of work that we're doing today, where each person among us has a specific role and responsibility in this process. This is an example of, how knowledge work is produced through collaboration. And, this is an example of how we did this with ITL research. It wasn't just people working loosely together. We had very clear responsibilities for who was doing what, bringing in expertise, folks like Jenny, folks like SRI International, to give us advice and build out the project and have timelines and project management around it. This is most often the way collaboration works in business organizations today. So as we think about redesigning learning, how can we design learning experiences that give students a flavor of that? So the collaboration rubric for 21st century learning design is looking at how students are asked to work together in a learning activity and the quality of that collaboration. So at higher levels, students, just being asked to work together is one level, but as you go more deeply into collaboration, students have to have shared responsibility for their work, and going from being graded for their own individual work versus being assessed as a team for the work that they've produced. And then going a step beyond that, asking students to collaborate in ways where they have to make substantive decisions together about the content or process of what they're producing, so that it's not given to them, they have to negotiate. And then at the highest levels of collaboration, student work is interdependent, where it draws on each person on the team to provide specific skills or expertise or a specific contribution for the team to succeed. One of the questions about collaboration is always how do you keep it from being one student who does all the work. And so a learning activity that's designed where each student has to be interdependent can solve that problem. So this is a summary of the collaboration rubric. The questions that are asked, are students required to work together? If yes, that gets you to a 2 coding score. So the requirement to collaborate in pairs or in groups gets you to a 2. In the learning activity, so this is in a lesson, do students have shared responsibility? If no, they remain at a 2. If they do have shared responsibility, it takes the learning activity to a 3. If they have to make substantive decisions together, it can get to a 4. And if work is interdependent, if their collaborative teamwork is interdependent, then that learning activity could be coded a 5. These rubrics are really designed to help teachers think through how they're designing learning activities in ways that will deeply help them, help students to develop these skills. So with that, I'd like you to open up House on Mango Street, the learning activity example, and I'm going to invite some of the other folks on the line to start to discuss this example. But what we're going to do is look at this example, talk about it for a moment, and then ask each one of you to come and vote on the poll on what kind of code you think this learning activity is. And could I ask Jenny, actually, for you to talk a little bit about what the House on Mango Street learning activity lesson, what it's asking folks to do.
Okay. And I think it's interesting that we start with what they were asked to do versus what they ended up doing. So the focus is House on Mango Street, which is a book. And the class age of the students responding to this learning activity are 13 years old. So we're expecting a reasonable capacity to be able to collaborate together on the task. And when you look at what the teacher asked to do in terms of the learning activity, one, to read the book first, but if you look at the wording in the script, it's very much Bloom's taxonomy, higher order, because the children are asked to synthesize information and then come into particular groups to start to gather, synthesize information, and then start to make some deeper connections with what the real immigrant's viewpoint would have been about coming to the US. So it was designed as a higher order task. So moving through then the process, yes, they were required to work in groups. And they were required to use technology in the activity. But as we started to go through the teacher's evaluation and the task that the students ended up doing, they didn't end up working in groups to produce the product.
That's right. They were asked to share feedback with each other. So each student was asked to write a poem about an immigrant's experience coming to the United States, and they were asked to share those poems with each other in pairs and provide feedback to each other. So that, and then, but each student was graded individually on their own poem. Mm-hmm. So given that, we're seeing lots of scores here of a 2, a few that are a 3, and I'm going to ask Delana, who's another teacher on the line, to talk about what she thinks this should be coded as and why.
Hi. So looking at this, I definitely agree that it starts off by saying that there's going to be group work together, and then the only option they provide is just feedback. So if you look in the rubric, it has the feedback section on page 3, if you have the handout in front of you, it says it's working together. Yes, pairs of students give feedback together, but then is it shared responsibility? No. So it's a shared responsibility component that we're missing, so I would have to score it as a 2 when I go through it. So do you want me to talk about possible changes to that at this point?
Not quite yet. I want to highlight one thing. But thank you both. Those are great discussions. And it's in these discussions with teachers that where they're starting to try to decide what's the code, that people start to really think about, oh, is this a 2 or a 3? And what would it take to be a 3? That it can start to activate teachers thinking about how they could redesign learning activities. And in fact, thinking about the lessons that all of you on the call have seen and the teachers that have produced, where they're trying to do collaboration. How frequently do they get beyond it to? I mean, how frequently do teachers really design projects where students have to have shared responsibility? Most times in most learning activities where teachers believe they're doing collaboration, they just ask students to work together loosely. And so they're not going to a high degree of collaboration in a way that really builds these types of skills. But Delana's absolutely right. The way this learning activity, this example learning activity is designed right now, it would just achieve a 2, which is what most teachers' projects would achieve in the way they design them right now. Now I'd ask you, Delana, to talk a little bit about how this type of learning activity might become a 3 or a 4.
So I was looking at it, and I think that this is an exciting project. I can see so many different options and different things where a teacher can really open it up for more student autonomy and collaboration. For example, the teacher could let the students work together, assigning responsibilities inside the group, as we mentioned before. They can track editing through a cloud-based application, meaning they can even do it outside of class time if needed. The roles could be things like having a recorder, a primary presenter, editors, developer, project manager, shape as needed for the age and specifications of that class. And also, I think the class could choose different types of presentation mediums. She suggests using a poem, but I can't help but think that maybe a dance or a song or a piece of artwork can also explain the journey of an immigrant. And also, I think that as a class or a small group, they could develop questions and discuss them and create rubrics for the interview so they can decide how they're going to score each other's work as an entire class.
Great ideas. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm Azhar from Egypt. If I have the chance to design this activity, I can divide the students into groups. Each group will read a part of the book. Then I invite them to a large open discussion to share their ideas about the immigrant experience. I ask them, each group to create a list of questions to ask an immigrant from neighborhood or a family. And after interviewing again, I invite the students to a more discussion to find out the problems and challenges that those people face. The last step will be creating a poem in groups again, because I noticed that in this activity, each student will create his or her own poem. But I want my students to do this in groups. Each member should have a certain role during the creation process. For example, they collaborate with each other to write the first draft of the poem. Then one of them writes or type it using any program. Another will revise and edit it to make it ready for presentation. Another one will present it in front of the class. Again, maybe my students don't like to write the poem, so they can make some sort of short play to act in front of other people to share their experience. This is what I can do.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That's a perfect example of how you can use this to really think through how to improve a learning design, a learning activity. And, just the simple, making 2 or more students responsible for writing a poem together takes this to a higher degree. And I believe somebody else had something to say on this theme as well.
Maria, it's Tracy. I had a question. I wonder, how does collaboration look differently based on the age of the student?
That's a great question. Does anybody on the line want to talk about that? It's the idea that students at any age can do collaboration. Children from a very young age start to do projects together. But you would want to think about the degree of shared responsibility. I mean, if students can do work individually, it stands to reason they can do work collaboratively. It's really a matter of whether students have any experience and any models in their head for working in this way, and that can be begun very early. And we've seen teachers who are building very, very collaborative projects for their kindergartners. You know, the complexity of a project and the complexity of the content and the assessment mechanisms need to be attuned to students' age, but certainly students at any age can begin to collaborate.
Mm. And I think another learning about the collaboration area in particular is the test. Would the student had to collaborate to complete this the way this task is actually designed? And my answer is that no, the kiddie could have done it all by themselves. So I think in the learning about how to design collaboration tasks, the teacher really needs to think that at the end of the day that this activity was much more successful because collaboration was involved or had to be involved.
That's right, that's right. It really, really comes down to how the work is assessed and whether they're assessed individually or whether they're assessed as a group, as a group. And I mean, I think about the collaboration of us putting this call together and how each of us has a specific role. Heather's running the technical side of it. Tracy's done an amazing job organizing it. My job is the content, and all of us have to work together very closely to make the whole thing come off. It's the same kind of thing, but we had to learn this type of collaboration experience on the job. We unfortunately didn't have too much experience doing this kind of work in school before we got here. So let me turn to another learning activity example that I've asked you to take a look at, the Olympic site selection. And I'll say these learning activities are not all designed to be great cases. They're designed to be examples that can be improved. So as you look at Olympic site selection, let's start to code that, and maybe Tracy, could you come in and describe what this project is, and then we'll bring in Silvana to talk about how it might be coded on the collaboration rubric?
I'll do my best.
Great.
So the lesson on the Olympic site selection is really a group of students who have been given a job to make a recommendation to the Olympic Committee about where to host the next Olympics. And they need to do that in a variety of ways, utilizing a variety of resources and taking into consideration a variety of things. And the result is that they are actually going to write a letter of recommendation to the site selection committee.
That's right. That's right. So in terms of collaboration, what are the critical pieces of this?
Well, that each student has a role to play. Mm-hmm. So they definitely were asked to work together. That's clear. They definitely could not do this on their own.
Great, great. Let me turn it over now to Silvana. Sorry for interrupting there, Tracy, but
no, it's good. Let's spread the wealth around.
There we go. There we go. Silvana, are you able to join the call right now?
Yes, I am.
Super.
Hi, everyone. Well, in my opinion, this activity calls for collaboration and could be coded as between a 4 and a 5 because, well, students are assigned different roles and there is interdependency in relation to their work because it depends on the research that each of them does that they will be able to make the final product later on because they have different roles. They stand on somebody's shoes as geologists, seismologists, they study volcanology, and it depends on the research each of them does that with the conclusions they can write a letter later. So they have to make an important decision together, and it is not an individual piece of work that will be put together as one part after the other. The conclusion of their individual work will be a joint product. So for me there is interdependency. They work individually and later they work together and there is a common product. So for me it could be coded between 4 and 5.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an excellent description of how the thinking process about this learning activity can really be informed by considering the rubrics. And, you know, I think it's probably right that this is a 5, that they have shared responsibility for the work product. They have to make substantive decisions together about which city to recommend, and then that they each had a specific and different role in investigating and putting that recommendation together. So this would be a 5. And the key, one thing to recognize is that these rubrics are to support teachers in thinking through how they're designing learning activities. It's not necessarily to evaluate a lesson it's really to be used as a support for teachers as they think through the learning design process. So any questions out there before we move to the second rubric that we'll look at, which is the use of ICT for learning? Okay. And we've talked about this already, but this is an important thing. How could learning activities be redesigned when you're running this as a professional development? We usually, when we run one of these professional developments, the 21st century learning design, it usually takes 2 to 3 days, sometimes longer. So you spend 2 or 3 hours on each rubric and discussing learning activity examples and really going into a lot of depth on thinking through how to redesign learning activities. And we really strongly recommend that when you run these types of professional development with teachers, you ask them to bring their own example learning activities with them and think about redesigning them as they work through understanding the rubrics. So let's turn to the use of ICT for learning as another rubric, an important one because it's so important to our lives today. And a great question to ask is this is presented to teachers is asking them how they are using technology in their teaching and whether they're using it in ways, as we talked about before, that really you layer technology on top of traditional teaching practices. Are they using it to show content and information, to deliver information, or are they really asking students to use technology in ways that develop student skills around knowledge creation? So the rubric for 21st century learning design is really looking at how teachers are asking students to use the technology. And what we see is sorry, I'm getting behind on a slide here. this rubric really looks at whether or not students have the opportunity to use technology, and then whether or not the use of technology, students' use of it, is really in the name of knowledge construction. Are they using technology to simply represent information, or knowledge construction is the idea of applying what is learned to a new context through analyzing, through creating new ideas, synthesizing ideas, etc. So whether technology is used just to receive content or whether it's used to produce something new is the critical decision point here between whether technology used for learning is a 2 or a 3. And then you have to ask whether technology is required for constructing this knowledge. Can the knowledge construction be done without technology? Could students gather information from books in the library? Could they produce a presentation on paper that would do the same thing as what they've done through a PowerPoint? And this is a hard thing to design into a learning activity that really takes advantage of the potential for technology to be used in knowledge construction. And to get to the very highest levels, and we've seen very rare examples of this in learning activities that we've looked at around the world, are students asked to produce an ICT product, like a blog or a simulation or something that can't be produced without technology. And is that product designed for a specific audience? So in the real world, when you're designing a knowledge-based product, it's always for a specific audience, for a customer, for a group of people. So students just producing a blog for their own classroom would not qualify as a 5. But if students are asked to produce something with a specific audience in mind, that's when they have to think about the knowledge construction and the design of their product in a much deeper, richer way. So with that explanation of the rubric, a high-level overview, let's turn to coding the Olympic site selection example on the use of ICT for learning. So we've already talked a little bit about this Olympic site selection learning activity example. So think about what this would be coded on the use of ICT for learning example. And I'm going to ask Delana to come in and talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on this example.
So I was reading through this, and it kind of surprised me because as I read through it, I'm not so sure that you really need to use ICT to gather the data and information for it. It seems to me that you can gather local information from magazines and newspapers and other items that you might find in a library, from books, doing research and things like that. So I actually scored this down at a 2.
Interesting. Good. Any other thoughts? Tracy, you want to chime in on what you think this is coded on?
Well, so that's pretty interesting, Delana, because that was initially my thought as well. However, when I really looked at the words that were used to describe how the teacher was structuring the learning activity and what specifically they wanted the students to do, it was very specific about getting up-to-date environmental data. And I think that, at least in my experience, up-to-date data would be really difficult to get from, kind of traditional sources, library or print sources. And so I actually thought it was a 4 because of that, because I didn't feel like they could accomplish it without ICT. But because the final product didn't necessarily have to be ICT-based, it wasn't ICT-based, I wouldn't score it as a 5. So 4 is my vote.
Thanks to you both. Interesting thinking there. And we're seeing a lot of debate on Olympic site selection and the coding score among sort of the voters in the poll, of participants on the call. So I want to give you a chance to think through this. A lot of people are voting a 2 on this, on use of ICT for learning. We've got about 20 to say it's a 2, so that would say, yes, ICT is required. They're asked to look up information on the internet, but is it used for knowledge construction? And that's the key shift between a 2 and a 3. Is the way technology is incorporated into this project asking students to use it for knowledge construction efforts? So Delana and Tracy, can you perhaps discuss that?
Delana, go ahead. You want to take it?
I am. Well, for me,
Yes.
I'm trying to read the directions really carefully here, and I noticed the second bullet, it really asserts to make sure that current environmental trends are taken into account. And so I think, I mean, if they mean like really current environmental trends, the most current information we can find, then it would seem to me that you probably would need some internet access to find the most current information. Tracy, what do you think?
Also, I think that because they're being asked to take that information and then make a recommendation, right? So they're taking original data, original sources, and then putting it into a different context, which is, you know, making a recommendation. Then that's why I think that it makes that leap, because that is knowledge construction.
Great. Somebody else, go ahead and chime in. Is it Savannah?
well, for me, it is a 3 because, well, although they could have used other sources to do the research, I think that the internet today is the most frequently used tool for students to do research, and even for people when they are at work and in real life, they usually use ICT to do research. Besides, the next step they use ICT in the project is to write or to type their letter of recommendation to the Olympic Committee. And well, that is also a real use of ICT in my opinion, because nobody these days would use a pen and a piece of paper to write a letter of recommendation. So I think it's a real life use of technologies.
Interesting. And you see how the discussion and different ideas about this learning activity give you thoughts about how it could be clearer, how the different ways of designing the learning activity can foster collaboration in different ways and foster use of technology in different ways. It could be a much richer technology-based project, but it certainly is asking students to use technology to gather data and to analyze data about the environmental conditions of the city. So in that respect, it's 3, and then they do that without technology. And that's simple, I think. But I think many of you on the call are right that it's probably required to get this kind of up-to-date information today. And I have an interesting thing to add, somewhat related to this. I was at a meeting in London last week, and a representative of the actual Olympic Committee came and saw this. I was talking about 21st century learning design, and they were very interested because they're building out a learning website for the next Olympics and really wanted to consider using this as part of it. So we'll see if that moves forward. But an interesting side connection to the Olympics example. So let's turn to one more example to get to give you a deeper sense of the use of technology rubric, and that's a Great Train Internet. A final example, and I'm going to ask Jenny to start to describe that example for us and what the project is so that people can start to decide whether they think on the use of ICT rubric that it would be coded.
Sure.
Actually, Maria, it's Tracy. I just want to interrupt because I'm sorry if I was the only one that missed it, maybe because there was some background noise, but what was the actual, correct scoring according to the researchers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's, so, when I run these, I try not to emphasize what the actual correct score is because that's really not the point. The correct score, the real point is to get teachers talking about and debating whether it's a 2 or a 3 or a 4. Among the people who have looked at this example in depth and designed the learning activity over and over and over again, there is some degree of consensus that it's a 4. Because students, it would be very hard to gather. It's certainly a use of technology for knowledge construction because they're analyzing and synthesizing data that they gather, and it would be very tough to gather that kind of current information without the use of technology today. But they're not designing a technology product, and so it doesn't reach a 5.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's turn to Jenny, and if you could describe for us what you think Great Train Internet, what the project is, the learning activity is.
So again, the students were focusing on a particular book, and it was 14-year-old students. And this, to ensure that the students understood the content of the book a little better, the teacher got the students to do some research, directed them to some websites to have a look at, and asked them to break up into groups to actually look at what, say, the role of women was like in the 18th century, what crime was like in the 18th century education. And you can see the number of groups that were set up there. So with that task in mind, the students were asked to organise some information to provide back to the class about their particular piece of research. It was restricted to a particular the Victorian era, which was from 1837 to 1901. The teacher got them to work in groups. They certainly were required to use technology. She allowed them to use specific pieces of software, which was an interesting part of the instruction. The students were asked to integrate their information, interpret the information as they produced their products, and in the end, the students were also asked to put together a presentation around PowerPoint or anything. They all used PowerPoint in the end to present their findings. And interesting, in the comments that the teacher provided, she noted that the students only went to the websites that she told them to go to. And one of the questions that in the reflection of the construction of the information using technology, the teacher has actually said no, they didn't make choices about using technology. They actually did what she told them to do and didn't go much outside that briefing. So they constructed the knowledge, but really there's a question mark about if ICT was required. Maybe it could have done by books more efficiently, certainly by using the internet. And then there's the question of the product as well. So from what the students were asked to do, the age of the students, and then you look at the product that they actually delivered, it's interesting how people might code this.
That's right. So there's a lot of complexity to think through in examining this learning activity, to think through, is technology required? Is it being used for knowledge construction? Is it, can the work be done without technology? And then the end product. So we're seeing a lot of different coding scores here. And if you are running a 21st century learning design workshop or session, it's actually really quite good to have a lot of people with different opinions, because then you can debate it, and it's through that debate, through that dialogue, that teachers really start to think hard about the learning design, and it's always in that discussion that the aha moments for teachers, the real learning takes place. And as you think this through, I want to comment on some of the talk that's been going on through shared notes. There's some comments here about asking teachers to consider how they would assess the work, and that it's in how the assignment as a whole is designed and how it's evaluated, the student work is evaluated. And I've said this before, but I want to really emphasize it, that is a critical part of learning activity design, was deciding, and that can be done, by a teacher, or in a lot of places now that's being co-constructed with students, where teachers and students work together to create the success criteria by which work would be assessed. And that is that entire topic of assessment, and being clear about what the learning goals are and how the work will be assessed, is part of the self-regulation rubric. And some of these rubrics are really powerful for really shaping very high-quality learning experiences. So, coming back to Great Train Internet here, it looks like we're getting consensus around a 4 score. And we haven't really given you enough time, and I completely acknowledge this, to really look at the learning activity examples in a lot of depth. But here, those of us who've looked at this in more depth believe that really this should be coded probably as 3, because they are using technology, websites, and other computer sources to learn about the Victorian era, and they had to analyze the information they found in a way that is real knowledge construction. But technology was not really necessary. Students could have done this work by looking at books in the library or print encyclopedia. The use of IT was not fundamentally necessary to the project in the way it was in the Olympic site selection, where it was immediate data from around the world. This was more historical information that could be accessed by traditional books and libraries in a different way. So that's the thinking there. But again, it's not to emphasize the right and wrong here, it's to emphasize the thinking process. So again, you can easily think through, I hope, how these learning activities could be redesigned to score something higher. Would anyone want to take a shot on the call at thinking through how the Great Train project could be designed to be kind of a richer project?
Yeah, this is Delana, and I love thinking through creative ways to upgrade projects. And one of the first things that comes to mind would be if the teacher would have created rubrics for parts of the assignment that detailed out how they gathered their information. Maybe ask them to provide a list of the websites they visited instead of providing those two. I kind of wonder, not knowing the security of that school and the building and the district, if maybe there was an issue about students going out onto internet sites. More importantly, a policy, probably a policy of the school district where the teacher had to do that. And then I was thinking that if they, well, I'll let other people talk. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, those are great ideas. These are some of the considerations that every teacher has to think through as they're designing a project. And, how could technology be used in a different way in this project, potentially to enrich the students' creative potential around producing their student work. And again, it doesn't have to involve student collaboration, but this one is really looking at how technology can be used in the project in different ways that can really support students in those higher level skills. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who participated in analyzing these learning activities. We wanted to give those of you on the phone a sense of how these sessions are run. You can probably sense there's a lot of complexity to these rubrics and how they can be applied to look at existing example learning activities and really to helping teachers work through collaboratively how they can redesign their own learning activities. There's some great stories of schools that are starting to put this into practice where they have Teach Meet or groups of teachers coming together monthly or periodically to bring their lesson plans, using the rubrics to collaboratively work together to redesign some of their lessons, going out and putting them into practice in their classrooms, and then coming back the next month and sharing their stories of how it worked and continuing to refine and develop and look at the impact of these changing practices on students' development. So I want to call your attention here at the tail end of our time together to the Pill Trainers site where the resources for running 21st century learning design sit. And each one of these, what we've gone through here, are designed into a one session for each rubric. And in that session, you'll find PowerPoints that present pretty much what I presented here about the ICT for Learning rubric, that give you ideas for discussing and sharing, that give you ideas about what learning activity examples you can pull in, and different ways you can structure these as facilitated sessions with teachers taking part. And I also want to call out to you that we really, really would value, as you're running these kinds of sessions, to invite teachers to share the learning activities they're developing more broadly through the Partners in Learning Network. This is a portal for teachers all around the world, and they can come and share their learning activities and describe them in these ways. And do it for free. It's part of the Partners in Learning commitment to teachers and supporting them in helping to redesign teaching and learning. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and to Tracy and to some of the final closing elements of the session.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. It's Tracy here, and unfortunately, I do want to make sure that we're very respectful of people's time who cannot stay with us past the past the hour. And so I want to encourage you, if you have questions, to please use the question and answer pane, and the rest of the team, including myself, as soon as we finish our call here, we'll work to answer all of those questions before we hop off the call. So thank you again, Maria. I think that it's been an amazingly rich session. The amount of collaboration that's been happening in the shared notes section provides a great idea of just how interested and engaged our trainers are in this kind of context. So thank you again. As far as next steps, or what we've been terming homework, what we ask you to do before our next webcast, which is on May 2nd, is to further explore the Level 300 resources that Maria just went through and utilize the training provider discussion thread to, start asking your fellow teacher educators how they might incorporate this work and how you could possibly see incorporating this professional development into your work with educators, and how do you see it fitting with the other resources that we've presented the past two sessions, like digital literacy and teaching with technology. So, we talked a little bit about how you can almost think of all of these different resources in kind of a spiraling way, or you could start with one and move to another. So we'd be really interested in seeing some of those discussions and seeing your thoughts on the teacher-trainer discussion board on the network. The other thing is to let us know if you'd like to contribute to the May 2nd webinar. And we need to know no later than the end of day tomorrow, and we will look at any of the proposals and get back to you over the weekend because the content will be due to us on Tuesday. What we're looking for are 5 to 10 minutes, and really no more than 10 minutes, closer to 5 minutes, teach-meet style presentations or discussion on successful best practices that you've personally utilized or seen specifically around building teacher capacity. So what we're not looking for are great lesson plans to utilize with students. There are many great lesson plans out there. You guys are the best of the best. What we're really looking for is how do you help build that teacher capacity within your school systems, and what are the things that you think would be useful to share with others, other training providers or peer coaches. So send an email to tilltrainer@microsoft.com with a brief summary of the best practice you'd like to share. Include your lessons learned, what would you do differently next time, and what resources, if any, could you make available to your colleagues, and that's this community right here. So PowerPoint, templates, and then finally, because we are presenting in English, you need to let us know that you feel comfortable presenting in English. And don't spend a lot of time doing that piece, at least until we tell you you've been chosen. And we're probably looking for maybe 3 to 5 participants for each option, for each of the 2-time options. So with that, I will thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you May 2nd.